Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in. If you're new here, consider subscribing. It really helps keep these stories coming. And while you're here, let me know in the comments where you're listening from. Now sit back, relax, and let's get into the story. I did not expect the city to change shape in a single night. I was in my studio apartment 2 blocks from Nicollet Mall in downtown Minneapolis, editing audio from a local band on my computer. The heater ticked the way it always did when outdoor air dipped into the 30s. It was late autumn. The leaves that had not been swept up yet were slick and dark against the sidewalk. My desk faced the window. I kept the blinds tilted so I could see the lights of the tower cranes over the Mississippi River and the distant pulse of the traffic signals along Hennepin Avenue. I listened to an old FM jazz station playing from a small receiver on the shelf because I liked the noise floor of a live broadcast. At 11:42 p.m., a test tone hit the signal. The music cut, then returned, then cut again. A voice with a clipped delivery said there would be an emergency announcement. The screen on my phone lit with the same alert, and every phone in the building that had not been silenced seemed to light up at once. A swarm of rectangles through curtains and blinds. The broadcast voice said civil containment zones were being established and that residents should remain indoors until further instructions were given. The wording was the same on my phone. The message did not include the word quarantine. It did not say the cause of the order. It did not mention a hazard or a chemical spill. It only used phrases that sounded like they had been tested in a workshop. Words that had rounded edges. Remain indoors, limit movement, monitor official channels. I muted the software on my computer and switched the radio to the local news station. The anchors had their calm voices on. They mentioned disturbances in 3 neighborhoods across the river and a large response around Hennepin County Medical Center. The words they used were violent incidents, extremely erratic behavior, and attacks on responders. I leaned toward the window. Below, on the nearest cross street, people were moving faster than normal. A rideshare pulled to the curb and then slid back into traffic, as if a driver changed their mind. A police sport utility vehicle blocked an intersection and then repositioned. I heard sirens, not one set, but many, on parallel streets, on the parkways, on the ramps to Interstate 94. In the reflection on my window, I saw my own shoulders set tighter. I keep binoculars on my shelf because I like to watch the river when I take breaks. I took them down and set my elbows on the table. I could see strobing lights and a tight group of officers moving with their rifles at a low ready stance, not up at the shoulder, not down, prepared. I watched a pair of paramedics kneeling by a person on the ground, and I watched one of the paramedics' gloved hands jerk back as if they had been cut. The person on the ground went still and then moved in a way that did not look coordinated. One of the police officers yelled. The paramedics stepped away. One tripped. The one who had fallen struggled to get their footing. The person on the ground grabbed for the paramedic's forearm and latched with both hands. The movement looked wrong, like there was no sense of pain or restraint on the person's face. The police line advanced. The scene dissolved in a clutter of bodies and flashing lights. A door slammed in my hallway. Someone ran down the stairwell, and then another door slammed below. I shut the radio off. I filled a plastic storage bin in the kitchen with water, then filled the bathtub. I have a habit of doing this when I think the power might go. It is the sort of thing people write about in discussion forums, and it sounds paranoid until it is not. I set 4 one-gallon jugs by the door and wrote the date on them with a thick marker. I turned my fridge to the coldest setting. I closed the stove gas valve at the wall, not because I expected a leak, but because I did not want to worry about it later. I pulled my heavy shoes from under the bed and set them by the door. I put a headlamp around my neck. I took my old handheld audio recorder, an H4n I used to carry on location jobs, and fresh batteries from the drawer. I pressed record and set the unit on the table with the microphones pointing toward the room. "This is Evan Hale," I said. "Downtown Minneapolis, near Nicollet Mall. It is 11:58 p.m. There is a civil containment order in effect. I am staying inside. This is a record for whoever finds it. It is not for broadcast. It is a record so I do not lose track of time. The minutes stretched. I heard horns and sirens. I heard the rotor noise from a helicopter that felt low enough to vibrate the window glass. I shut my apartment lights and moved through the rooms with a flashlight pointing to the floor so I would not backlight myself in the windows. When I looked down to the street again, the number of people had thinned. Some ran with bags. Some moved slowly as if they were refusing to admit they needed to move fast. I could see 3 police vehicles angled in a triangle with their front bumpers pointed at each other. There was a barricade on the far side of the intersection that looked temporary, metal frames with mesh. I watched a person push through the barricade and stumble into the street. 2 officers walked forward with hands out like they wanted to stop a fight without escalating it. The person lunged at the nearer of the officers in a way that was not like a fight. There was no stance, no balance. It was a rush. I looked away. I kept the recorder running. I told the recorder what I was doing. I closed the deadbolt, put a line of screws in the doorframe strike plate, wedged a cut oak dowel into the sliding window track. I pushed my heaviest bookshelf against the door. I stood and listened for air movement through the door and heard only the building ventilation. I have an irrational dislike of silence, which is ironic given how much time I spend editing sound. So I kept the recorder on and spoke once every few minutes. I listed my food: 2 large bags of rice, a bag of rolled oats, 8 cans of beans, 4 cans of fish, various spices, 3 jars of peanut butter, a bag of mixed nuts, and several items in the freezer. I counted my water stores. I have 2 N95 masks in a sealed bag, left from a job during the pandemic. I have nitrile gloves. I have a small first aid kit. I do not own a firearm. I have a heavy aluminum flashlight. I have a pry bar I use for mounting acoustic panels. I said all of this into the recorder because I wanted to prove that I was paying attention and not indulging fear. I set my sleep mat on the floor, away from the windows, and set my jacket as a pillow. I lay there with the headlamp tilted aside and watched the brightness of the city dim and then swell and then dim. I could not tell if the power went out in pockets or if I was watching emergency vehicles move. I heard voices in the hallway a little after 1 in the morning. I heard someone knocking 3 doors down and then someone else telling them to stop. I did not move. I kept the recorder running and told it the time. When I did sleep, it was a short stretch of not very deep sleep that felt like turning my face toward the floor to make the hours pass. I woke to weak daylight and to the sound of an engine that was not a normal car. It was the slow diesel of either a heavy truck or a generator. I peeled the blinds back. 3 blocks away, a line of Minnesota National Guard vehicles rolled in convoy. Their speed was careful, not fast, not slow, as if the drivers had been briefed to move with a certain cadence to prevent accidents. I watched a pair of drones the size of large birds drift over the street, each with a downward pointing speaker. The voice that came through was clear and recorded. It repeated the containment order. It said to remain inside and to wait for additional instructions. The drones turned the corner and the sound thinned and then faded. On the second day, it was quieter. I ate rice and beans and made tea. I charged my headlamp from a battery pack. I stopped checking my social feeds. The messages had turned into unreliable heat. People posted videos from angles that looked like they had been chosen to get views. The videos were from unknown dates and unknown neighborhoods. The comments were unhelpful. I kept the radio on a local frequency. The anchors' voices sounded tight now. I recognized the long pauses at the end of segments, the same way I had heard them during blizzards. Except this time, the anchors were careful to say they were broadcasting from remote locations. They were not in the studio. Late in the afternoon, I took the stairs down 1 flight to the mailroom. I paused with my ear to the concrete before each landing. I held the heavy aluminum flashlight in my left hand, not raised, not lowered. I moved it this way because I once watched a training video that said, "You will not know what to do with your hands if you get afraid." I collected my mail and returned to my apartment without seeing anyone. The hallway smelled like dust and cardboard. Not yet like the garbage chutes I did not want to imagine. That evening, a woman knocked on my door. She used her knuckles, 3 short taps, and then she used her voice. "Please," she said, "I need help. I am from 8C. I froze and then forced myself to look at the peephole. I saw a woman in a grey hoodie with the hood down. There was something dark on her sleeve. Her face was not grey with shock. She stood balanced, shoulders level. She did not sway. Her left hand held a bag with a red cross taped to the side. I told her to stay where she was and to show me both hands. She did. I turned the deadbolt and moved the bookshelf off the door, enough for the door to open a few inches. She kept her distance. Her voice was steady. "I am Lisa," she said. "I am a nurse. I have a medical bag and a radio from the hospital. I am not infected. I need a place to rest for an hour. I will leave if you ask. I only need a place to sit and a phone charger." I let her in. I closed the door and set the locks. She stood with her hands away from her body. I gave her a towel and pointed her to the sink. She washed her hands and her forearms. The dark on her sleeve was dried. When she peeled the hoodie off, there was no injury underneath. The colour on the fabric had come from someone else. She looked around my apartment and then at the recorder on the table. "You're documenting," she said. "Good." She took a handheld radio from her bag and set it next to the recorder. It was a professional unit with a short antenna and a display I recognized from security jobs. "How did you get that?" I asked. She said she had taken it when she left the hospital because no one at the hospital knew which channels would remain up. She told me she had worked the night shift. She told me she had done everything she could and then left when the last instruction over the hospital intercom had been to ensure personal survival. She told me there had been an order from federal authorities called Alpha Containment. She said it in a way that made it sound like she did not accept it. I asked what the phrase meant and she said it meant that officers had been told to stop the spread by any means required, including force. She lowered her voice and looked at the floor when she said the last part. I boiled water and gave her tea and an energy bar. She was in her mid-30s, dark hair pulled into a knot, hands steady, eyes that looked like she had trained herself not to stare at anything painful for more than a second. She started to talk only after she sat on the floor, back against the wall, legs stretched out to prove she did not intend to go anywhere. She did not ask for food or money. She asked for water and quiet. I gave her both, and I recorded the hours so I would know when she rested. She fell asleep in 5 minutes and slept without twitching. When she woke, she checked the radio for any call-outs. She turned the volume down to a whisper because she said she did not want the sound to drift into the hallway. She heard 2 voices, one that sounded like city services, one that sounded like law enforcement, discussing the closure of Interstate 35W southbound ramps near downtown. There was a plan to redirect foot traffic away from the Minneapolis Convention Center because the staff there could not keep the doors secure. There was mention of US Bank Stadium, then a phrase about staging buses for evacuation, and then a stop code, as if someone had cut the line. Lisa stretched her legs. "I'm going to ask you for something," she said. "I need a place to stay for 2 days. I will help you with what you need. After that, I move on. I will not take your space longer than that." I told her that I had never considered my apartment as something to share with a stranger, and that I was worried I would wait too long, and then be asked at the end of a long hallway by someone I did not choose. I told her that yes, she could stay for 2 days, as long as she helped me think through what happens next. She nodded once, and then placed her medical bag on the table. She asked for a clean surface. I wiped the table. She pulled out her supplies and set them in rows. Gloves, gauze, adhesive bandages, an emergency tourniquet, wound wash, a stapler, scissors, a blood pressure cuff, a small bag of intravenous equipment, saline solution, a handful of medications, acetaminophen, ibuprofen, a course of amoxicillin clavulanate, a course of doxycycline, oral rehydration packets, and a printed, laminated reference card she kept for emergencies. She had labelled everything with a permanent marker. I told her about the plan I had formed in my head and kept avoiding because it required moving. I said I believed that if we had to move through the city, the best choice would be to avoid the ground. Minneapolis has a skyway system, enclosed bridges and corridors that connect many of the downtown buildings above street level. I had used them enough to know the general path from my building to the IDS Center and to City Center, and, if the doors were not locked, to reach the Nicollet Mall light rail station. The skyways are separated by doors that lock at night. The doors are often controlled by building security. Some doors are open for 24 hours, others are not. Some have card readers. Some have alarm contacts. I told Lisa that I knew where the service corridors were inside my own building, and that those corridors connected to delivery bays that were normally quiet at night. I believed the interior path was the safest way to cross downtown if we had to leave, or if we wanted to look for supplies without crossing every street corner at ground level. Lisa listened without interruption. She asked about my experience with the doors and whether I had tools that would allow us to bypass a locked latch without breaking the door. I told her I had a set of shims and a flat pry bar, and that I hated the way the pry bar sounded when it contacted metal. She asked whether I had used the shims before. I said yes, on interior doors with loose strikes. She said we should not rely on any one path, but should map at least 3. She asked me to draw the floor plan of my building, including the stairwells and the roof access. And I did, from memory and from the fire escape map next to the elevator. We set the maps on the floor and made notes. We argued, but in a way that was not loud. She wanted to go to a pharmacy that was across Hennepin. I wanted to avoid Hennepin because its storefronts were glass. She wanted to try the medical supply closet of a clinic she knew. I wanted to lean on the small independent offices inside the towers because their break rooms often had bottled water and snacks. We agreed on a rule. We would move only at night. We would avoid open atriums. We would stop moving every 30 minutes and listen for sound. And we would keep our lights pointed at the ground unless we needed to identify a door handle or a lock. We would carry earplugs to protect our hearing if we had to be near a siren. We would not run unless we had to. The second night was the first night I realized what the phrase "emptying city" meant when I said it out loud. The street noise had dropped by half. The sound of the river carried farther. In the quiet, I heard a single shopping cart squeak, and then nothing, and then a shout that cut off too fast. The drones came again with their speakers. The recorded message now included an update that said, "Do not approach individuals showing signs of unresponsiveness, followed by sudden aggression. Do not attempt to provide care unless you are trained and have proper protection." The message repeated, and I watched a group of 4 people come out of a side street and set out a sheet by the curb, as if they intended to load something onto it. They moved carefully, like they had rehearsed, and then they wrapped the sheet around something and pulled it toward an alley. I recorded the time out loud for my log and did not write any adjectives. On day 3, the power fell out in steps. One line of streetlights went dark, then the next. The skyway lights stayed on a while longer. Office towers went from lit floors to dark floors in patterns that did not correspond to any normal schedule. The elevator in my building stopped with a chime and did not start again. I could hear the elevator machine room a few floors above mine tick as relays tried to start a motor that did not want to. In the afternoon, I heard someone playing an acoustic guitar 2 floors down. They stopped after 2 songs and never started again. That evening, Lisa developed a fever. It was not like the sudden dangerous fevers I had seen in emergency rooms with friends. It was the slow, steady rise of a person who had not slept enough, had not eaten enough, and had pushed her body beyond what it should have done in the last 72 hours. She checked herself with the thermometer from her bag. She measured her blood pressure. She said there was no reason to believe it was the thing everyone feared. We had kept our apartment sealed. We had not been in the presence of anyone who had attacked anyone. We had not been bitten. We had been careful. She drank water and lay still, and her breathing calmed, but the fever held above normal. She called it exhaustion, and she said it needed rest, and ibuprofen, and electrolytes, and time. She had some rehydration packets in her bag, but not many. She wanted a specific antibiotic to have on hand if her chest hurt, or if she developed a secondary infection. She told me exactly what she would want: amoxicillin clavulanate or doxycycline. Not because she believed she needed it immediately, but because she had learned to gather what she might need while she still could. She said she could walk, but her voice said she would pay for it if she tried. I said I would go. I did not wait for her to say it was a bad idea. I had no interest in heroics. I wanted the supplies, so that I could stop looking at the colour of her skin every 5 minutes. I set my gear on the floor and forced myself to list it. I wore my heavier jacket because I would be outside at some point. I put on a thin beanie so my ears would not ring with the cold air. I put on nitrile gloves inside fingerless gloves so I could still feel. I set my headlamp to its lowest brightness with the red filter in place. I took the recorder and put it in a chest pocket and told it the time. I put a screwdriver and the pry bar in a small sling bag. I took a small spray bottle with diluted dish soap in it so I could quiet squeaky hinges if I needed to. I took a mask. I did not take anything that would make me overconfident. The first door out of my floor was the stairwell. I opened it slow. I moved one flight down to the delivery level. I put my ear to the concrete wall and listened. The building breathed. I imagined the pipes and the ventilation and tried to hear beyond them and heard nothing. I cracked the delivery door with the shim, careful with the latch. The corridor beyond was lit by emergency lights, dim and just enough to outline the door frames and the rolling bins for recycled paper. I moved along the wall. I kept my eyes on the floor for dropped items and any sign of a struggle. I reached the back loading dock and cracked the heavy door to the alley. Cold air came in and made the hair on my arms stand. I smelled smoke, not the thick smoke of a structure fire, the drift of trash burning in a barrel or of a car that had been left to idle until something heated beyond its limit. The back alley was a normal alley that had been emptied of its normal noise. The sound of my shoe on a piece of grit was louder than I liked. I kept the headlamp off and let my eyes adjust. I paused. I listened. I moved. I was not a movie version of quiet. I was a person not practiced at this kind of quiet, and I tried to be less clumsy each step. I passed the back of a restaurant. The back door stood partly open. The smell of cold fryer oil sat heavy in the air. I did not go inside. I passed a service entrance for an office tower and found it locked with a card reader and a lever handle. I tried the lever. The latch moved, but did not release. I stopped and breathed and told the recorder the time and that I had learned that door was not a path. I moved on. At the next block, I reached the parking access ramp under the city centre complex. The gate arms were up. The cameras showed a red LED, which means power to the camera but no feed. I took the incline down to the lower level. The air was warmer here. The concrete held the day's heat. The parking levels in downtown towers are like caves with predictable geometry. Rows of pillars, rows of lights, stair towers at the corners. I kept to the periphery so I could touch the walls with my shoulder. In the far corner, I found the service door with a cheap mechanical knob. I turned it. It was locked. I set the pry bar under the latch and pulled until the metal flexed and the latch popped free. The sound was not loud, but in the quiet, it felt like I had hit a pipe with a hammer. I stepped inside and closed the door behind me and stood still for 30 seconds, counted it silently, then moved. The service corridor climbed up 2 flights to a door that led into the back of a food court that I recognized from lunch hours that felt like a different decade. The gate to the front was down. I could see the tables beyond, chairs up on their legs. I was not interested in the food. I was interested in the pharmacy several skyways away. I made a mental map. From city centre to the IDS centre to the skyway that leads toward Nicolette. Then across to the tower with the small pharmacy near the ground floor. The skyways themselves would be the risk. If the doors were locked, I would have to drop to the street. If they were open, I would be in a glass corridor 2 stories above the ground, visible to anyone who looked up, but still safer than the sidewalk. I found the door to the skyway corridor. It was locked with a push bar and a magnetic lock. A magnetic lock holds with an electromagnet and releases when the access control system tells it to. In a power failure, they often release, but many systems have backup power. I ran my fingers over the frame until I found the small power cable that fed the magnet. It had a small junction box. The screws in the cover were not tamper-proof, just standard. I set the screwdriver, turned slowly, and took the cover off, and then pulled the inline connector. The magnet stopped resisting. The push bar opened the door. I stepped into the skyway and slid the cover back over the wires, not because I needed to, but because I needed to feel like I was not wrecking every door behind me. The skyway was dim. Emergency lights washed the evenly spaced floor with rectangles of weak light. I set the headlamp to the lowest setting. I aimed it at my shoes. The city outside was a black mirror. When I paused in the center of the bridge, I could see the street below. A car had been left at the curb, with both doors open on the sidewalk side. There was a cardboard box under the front bumper, as if someone had been fixing something. I watched for 30 seconds and saw no motion. The only living thing I could see was a shape that might have been a raccoon cut through a pool of light and then disappear. I listened for the voice from the drones and heard none. I listened for the shuffle of shoes and heard none. I crossed into the next building and found the door locked. The badge reader was dark. The push bar did nothing. The glass on the door would have shattered if I pried, and I did not want the noise, and I did not want to leave a trail like that. I turned and looked at the map posted on the wall. There was an alternative path through a maintenance corridor that ran parallel to the skyway for fire exits. I doubled back 20 steps and found the red labelled exit door. It opened into a narrow hallway with concrete block walls painted white. The emergency lights worked. I moved down the hallway and took the next door left and found myself in a stairwell that led to the mezzanine level. The stairs produced that hollow stairwell echo if you place your heel too hard. I flattened my foot, rolled it toe to heel the way a trainer showed me once. I took each landing and listened. No voices, no coughing, no unexplained sound. I moved. The pharmacy on Nicolette had a metal gate, and the metal gate had a lock that would not be defeated quietly. I stood by it and considered the options. Try to drop to the street and enter through the front. Try to find the loading entrance on the back lane, or drop the idea and turn back. I told the recorder my thinking because it made me slow down. I did not want to get into the habit of pushing forward just because I was committed to the idea. I turned away from the gate and kept to the service corridors, following the painted arrows that staff used to bring hand trucks to the stores. 2 turns later, I found a door with a mop sink and the smell of bleach. The next door had a label for deliveries. It was locked with a latch commonly used in malls. I set the pry bar under the latch and turned gradually, breathing out, and the latch eased. I pushed the door and felt cool air and smelled dust. I entered a hallway with steel shelves and cardboard boxes stamped with the names of suppliers. I did not break any boxes. I moved room to room until I found the pharmacy's interior door. It had a keypad. Above it was an emergency sprinkler pipe. At the floor, a gap under the door showed darkness beyond. I was not going to try to force the keypad. I looked for a secondary way in and found the pharmacist's pass-through counter not fully closed, the way it might be if someone left in a hurry. I worked the pass-through to the open position, rolled over the counter, and landed softer than I expected. I kept still. I waited. My heart rate slowed. I set the headlamp to its lowest setting, kept the red filter on, and moved behind the shelves. The shelves were half-stocked. I knew what I was looking for. I did not want to panic and sweep medicine into my bag that I did not need. I stood still and ran through what Lisa had said out loud. Antibiotics, amoxicillin clavulanate or doxycycline, electrolyte packets, pain relievers, a thermometer, a fresh roll of medical tape. I found the adult-size electrolyte packets. I found small boxes with the antibiotic names she wanted locked in the cabinet behind the counter. The cabinet lock was a simple cam. I tried the handle to see if anyone had left it in the open position. It moved and then stopped. I set the pry bar under the door, where the wood was thick so the metal would not splinter. I pulled slowly. The cam bent. The door opened. I took one course of each antibiotic. I took a small amount of what I needed and wrote the names and dosages on a notepad that I left on the counter with the date and the words, needed for nurse, non-resale, will pay if system resumes. It was a useless gesture. I did it anyway. I took a fresh box of gloves and a package of surgical masks. I did not take anything else. When I stepped back into the service corridor, I heard a sound. It was not a voice. It was the thumping echo of something hitting a rolling gate down the hall. 3 thumps, then a scrape. I turned my head and tried to sense direction. I set the headlamp off with a fingertip. I stepped to the side and lowered my center of gravity, not like a fighter, just like a person trying to be less of a target if anything came around the corner. I heard another scrape, closer. I did not go toward it. I waited. A shape moved at the end of the corridor and then another shape. I could not tell if they had seen me. The corridor had many doors. I set my hand on the knob behind me and turned it. It opened to a broom closet. I did not enter the closet. I moved backward along the wall until I could feel an intersecting corridor with my free hand. I took the turning and stepped into the dark. I paused and listened. The scraping sound faded. I had the idea that the shapes in the hallway were not moving with the necessity of someone searching for a specific person. They were moving in the repetitive pattern of people whose attention did not work. I waited. I counted to 60. I counted to 60 again. I turned the headlamp onto its lowest level, aimed at the floor, and moved in the opposite direction of the sound. I took a different path back. I avoided the door with the magnetic lock to prevent leaving electrical evidence of my passage. I used stairwells and service corridors that led to a different parking level. When I reached the gate to the outside, I stopped and looked for movement in the alley. I saw none. I stepped into the cold and shut the door softly behind me. It was still night. It felt like the darkest part of night, the part just before the light begins, when the city goes quiet, as if it is holding its lungs in. When I crossed the alley, I stepped on a plastic bottle and the sound was loud enough to make me freeze. I listened. I heard a soft footfall on the sidewalk at the end of the alley. I crouched behind a dumpster and watched the gap. A person walked by slowly, stopped, turned their head as if trying to find the source of an odor, and then resumed. Their gait had no rhythm. Their arms hung loosely. They did not look left or right. They did not look up. They moved on. I waited until I could no longer hear their shoes. I counted to 60 again. I moved to the back of my building, entered the delivery door, and shut it behind me. When I reached my apartment and set the locks, Lisa was propped up on the floor with the radio on her lap. She was pale, but alert. I handed her the bag and told her what I had done. She did not praise me. She did not say I should not have gone. She took the antibiotic courses out and set them aside and prepared an electrolyte drink and drank it slowly, not all at once. She took a dose of ibuprofen. She took her temperature again. It had dropped 2 degrees. She slept. I sat with my back against the wall and listened to the building breathe. I wanted to cry and I did not. My hands shook and then stopped. I turned the recorder back on and told it the time, and that I had made a round trip into the Skyway system without being seen, as far as I knew. I spoke in a monotone, so I did not wake Lisa, and because I did not want to add drama to a situation that already had too much. On the 4th day, the city sounded like what I imagine a city would sound like if someone had closed the lid on it. The cars that still moved did so with no regular pattern. The horn blasts came in singles, not clusters. The helicopter sound changed from the large, heavy thrum of military transport to the sharper pitch of smaller craft. The drones returned with the same message. The recorded voice now included a line that said, "Shelter in place has been extended. Do not attempt to reach staging locations unless instructed." The sky had a high, thin overcast. The air smelled like a mix of wood smoke and cold river water. We moved to a schedule. We slept in shifts. We cooked and ate and cleaned like we were living in a camp. We kept the door barricaded. We kept the windows covered. Twice a day, I used the binoculars to look at the street and at the river and at the bridges to see any pattern of movement. I wrote down what I saw with the exact time. I did not color the entries with my feelings. I did this to avoid inventing a pattern where there was none. At 10:15 a.m., a group of 6 people pulled 2 luggage carts down the center of the street, away from downtown. At 10:21 a.m., 2 of them dropped behind. At 10:25 a.m., the 4 remaining turned the corner and disappeared. At 10:40 a.m., the 2 who had dropped behind were gone. I did not add a conclusion. I did not know if they hid, or if they fell, or if someone opened a door for them. At 1:02 p.m., the lights in the tower across the street came on for 1 minute and went out, which meant there was a generator test, or that someone on an upper floor had started a portable unit. At 8:18 p.m., the sirens sounded on the far side of the river and then stopped, and then 1 additional siren sounded and did not change pitch for 10 minutes. I did not know what it meant. The list took up a page and then another. Lisa read it and nodded and did not ask me to read it to her. She read it quietly like someone scanning a patient chart. On the 5th day, we used the roof. The stairwell to the roof is inside a locked cage in our building, but the lock is a keyed cylinder, and the cage has a hinge that is mounted in a way that allows the hinge pins to be tapped out with a screwdriver and a small hammer. I carried the screwdriver and a wrapped wrench as a hammer. I tapped slowly and paused after each sound. The pins lifted. We opened the gate. We raised the hatch. Cold air dropped down the stairwell and made our skin prickle. We climbed onto the roof and lay low near the parapet and did not silhouette ourselves at the edge. The city looked like a planned model of a city where someone had forgotten to finish the scene. The freeway interchange at the edge of downtown was empty. There were 2 accidents on the ramp that looked like they had been left, not cleared. The US Bank Stadium roof glowed a dim purple, then went dark, then glowed again, then stayed dark. The Mississippi was flat and grey and slow. The Stone Arch Bridge had no pedestrians. The 3rd Avenue Bridge carried 2 police vehicles, and then none. A helicopter flew from the direction of Hennepin County Medical Center toward the north. It did not circle. It did not hover. It flew a straight line. We stayed on the roof for 8 minutes, and then closed the hatch and set the hinge pins again and oiled them so they would not squeal if we needed to move fast later. We spoke less on day 6 because there was less to say. Our words were practical. We set rules for noise. We set a rule for lights. We set a rule for handling the door if anyone knocked. We made a single page that said, "Do not open the door on a voice without seeing the person. Do not open the door on a person without scanning for injuries or signs of erratic movement. Do not open the door unless both of us are present and on our feet. If separated, return to the apartment. If that is not possible, go to the roof by stairwell B and use chalk to mark 1 line if safe, 2 lines if not safe. Use 3 lines if leaving permanently." It felt performative to write it, then it felt necessary. I taped the page to the wall by the door. We found evidence of other people trying to make their own plans. On floor 6, there was a note taped to the fire door that said, "We move to the river. Do not follow. It is not safe." The word "not" had been written over once to make it darker. On the door to apartment 7F, someone had taped a piece of cardboard with the words "Gone North." The cardboard had been cut from a moving box. I recorded each note. I did not know if they were decoys. I did not care. I wrote them because they marked patterns of thought. On the 7th day, the voice on the radio changed. The anchor said this would be the final scheduled broadcast from their facility. They would attempt to continue on low power and on a schedule that would be announced through federal channels. The voice broke a little, not in a dramatic way, just in the way that happens when a person has not slept and is trying to say a thing right the first time. An hour later, the emergency broadcast channel carried a short message with 2 sentences. It said, "All urban centers are no longer being supported. Survivors should move inland toward pre-identified rural zones when safe to do so, or shelter in place until conditions improve. Do not attempt to access closed zones." The message repeated 3 times. Then the channel went to a holding tone, then to silence. That afternoon, the building's power failed for good. The emergency lights burned steady for 20 minutes and then dimmed. Our refrigerator drifted into quiet. The hallway lighting went out. The elevator machine room clicked once and then did not click again. In the stairwell, I could hear a sound that made me stop and hold my breath. It was not a voice. It was the soft contact of something heavy against concrete every minute or so, at a level below ours. I did not go to see. I did not want to give that sound a shape. We moved to cold meals and candles set behind heat-proof glass. We opened the fridge only to take out what we would eat. We placed drinking water in 3 locations so that if one was spilled, we had 2 more. We slept with our shoes near our feet and a jacket within reach. We checked the door every hour by standing with our ear against it for a full 60 count. We did not talk when we did this. We recorded what we could and then stopped recording when there was nothing to add. The recorder's flashing light was too bright. On the 8th night, we heard rotor noise that was not drone noise. We climbed to the roof. 2 helicopters moved across the downtown like they were making a last pass for something we could not see. We waved with a headlamp, not in an emergency pattern, just to make movement. The helicopters did not change course. They flew toward the stadium and then banked south. A few minutes later, a louder, heavier helicopter flew north, the kind that can carry more people, the kind that uses fuel faster. It did not bank. It flew past and was gone. The stadium stayed dark. The river stayed flat. We stayed on the roof until our hands chilled. We lowered the hatch and replaced the hinge pins. In the stairwell, the darkness had the kind of weight that comes from concrete and cold air. I paused and put my ear to the metal door to the 8th floor landing. I could hear a soft shuffling on the carpeted hall beyond, like a person moving in shoes that did not fit, like the slowed step of someone walking in the dark without their hands out. I did not open the door. I motioned to Lisa, and we stepped back 1 flight to our floor and entered our hallway and moved silently past the closed apartment doors. And not one door opened, and not one voice called to us, and the only sound was the faint whistle of the building's vents winding down to nothing. That night, I used the recorder again. I said, "It is the 8th day. The building is dark. We still have water. We have food for a month if we use it strictly. The radio has said to move inland or shelter in place. We are staying in place. We see no reason to move now. We will only move if the building becomes unsafe." On the 9th day, the smell changed. It was not strong in the halls. It was not strong in our apartment. It was faint in the stairwell if you placed your face close to the door seams. It was the mixture of old food and unwashed cloth and something else under it. It was the smell of a city not being cleaned. It made us both more alert. We made a list of supplies we would need if we had to move. Water jugs, the medical bag, the radio, the recorder, a compact stove with a small fuel canister, a pot, 2 cups, a map, 2 headlamps, extra batteries, a compact tarp, rope, gloves, masks, a set of layered clothes, and my small personal items. We placed the items by the door in 2 piles. We did not pack them. We set them and left them. We did not want to live in a state of leaving. At sundown, we listened again. I put my ear to the door. I could hear a faint scuff that sounded like a shoe sole dragging on carpet, and then a pause, and then another scuff. It stopped at our door, and then it moved on. The scuff noise went down the hall. It paused at the far end. It did not return. I looked at Lisa. She had her hand on the medical bag, as if the bag was a person. She removed her hand and nodded and went back to the table. I sat next to her and set my hands on my knees and told myself not to invent a scene in which I would be brave in a hallway I could not see. We did not make a decision to go to the roof again that night. We made the decision at first light. We climbed the stairwell, lifted the hatch, and crouched behind the parapet. The morning was flat and grey. The cold air made me cough once. I stopped myself. I took the binoculars and scanned toward the stadium. There were no buses. There were no lines. I scanned toward the river. The bridges were empty. I scanned north and then west and then south. The roads had a handful of vehicles spaced far apart and none moving. I saw 3 groups of people. 2 moved like people who did not want to be seen. One moved like a group that did not care. Far off, a helicopter flew one last time. It did not hover, it did not circle. It flew a straight path toward the south horizon. I watched it until it was a dark shape against the clouds, and then gone. We stayed until our hands were cold again. We watched for any signal that someone else was guiding this city now. We saw none. We closed the hatch and replaced the pins and pushed the screwdriver deeper into my pocket so it would not clink against anything. Back in the apartment, we sat at the table. The recorder sat between us. I turned it on. I said, "If anyone finds this, know that the city did not fall in one night. It emptied. It did not explode. It drained. The sounds did not vanish all at once. They thinned and then thinned again, until when a noise happened, it felt like a stone into calm water with no echo. We watched the streets, and the streets changed shape. We heard the orders, and then we did not hear them. We stayed hidden. We moved only when we had to. We learned that the line between fighting and hiding is not a line, it is a range. You choose where you stand based on the room you are in, and the door you are behind, and the person breathing next to you. We did not speak after that for a while. We ate, we rested, we checked the door and the stairwell and the roof in the same order we had used for days. The routine was the point. The routine was our message to ourselves that we had not surrendered our ability to choose. The building had gone dark, and then quiet, and then something less than quiet. Something that was like the sound of another animal in a room, when you know it is there, and it is not showing itself to you, and it is not making a sound that tells you what it wants. We chose not to decode that sound. We chose to live with it, with our shoes near our feet, with the door braced, with a map taped on the wall. We chose to be the ones who watched and wrote and made the kinds of choices that you never think you will have to make when you sign a lease and put your name on a mailbox label and fill a refrigerator and lose your afternoon to some tracks a band recorded that you were sure would break them. At dusk, I stood by the window and lifted the blinds just enough to see the tops of the traffic signals. They cycled without traffic under them, red to green, to yellow to red. The cycles were not synced anymore because no one monitored them. The city had turned into a system running unattended. The light on the crane did not blink. The sign on the tower that had once had a moving message was a black band. A single window 2 floors down showed a candle. The candle moved once and then steadied and then went dark. I wrote the time and that one line. And then I put the pen down and listened to the sound of my own breathing and to Lisa's and to the building and to the city that I had learned down to its frequency. And I told myself that the purpose of the recorder was not to make this narrative neat, not to make it dramatic, but to make it real. So some other person could pick up where I'd stopped and know we at least tried to do this carefully. On the 10th day, the stairwell sounded different, not louder, not even more frequent, different. There was a scrape on concrete that came in a thoughtful pattern, like a person dragging one foot because the shoe had come loose. It stopped near the 7th floor landing, and it stayed there for a long time. We did not open the door. We moved our routine to the opposite stairwell for the roof. We put our marks in chalk, one line for safe, right above the door handle, so that if we had to choose quickly in the dim, we would know this was our path. We packed our 2 piles into our bags, but did not shoulder them. We kept our jackets near and our gloves where we could reach them without looking. Late in the afternoon, I heard radio traffic that was not the recorded announcements. The signal was weak. A person with a clear voice said they were moving a small group toward a church on the west side of the river. They said they did not have fuel for another day. They said they would hold there and reassess. Another voice said the same words back as if confirming. A third voice told them to stay off Hennepin and to cut down 3rd. There was a short tone and then silence. We did not get any more. Lisa traced a line on the paper map with a pen and nodded. She did not say we would go. She did not say we would not. We returned to our seats. We listened. In the dark, when the building had settled and when even the distant sirens had stopped, the elevator shaft became the strangest thing in the building. It had always been a thing in the background. It now felt like a vertical hall separate from the building. If you stood near it, you could hear faint air movement. You could hear sound from floors far below distorted by the shaft into something like breathing. I stood with my ear near the shaft door for a second, and then moved away, and then moved back, and then forced myself to stop. I returned to the apartment and shut the door, and put my forehead against the cool of the wood. I told myself that every building has behaviours, and that we were only learning ours, not watching it become haunted by our fear. We went to the roof for the last time that week, just before midnight. We climbed the stairwell. We opened the hatch. We stayed low. The city had settled into a pattern of dark that I recognise now. The river was a grey strip. The stadium was a shape with no light. The crane lights were off. The bridges were empty. Far in the distance, a row of lights moved along a highway that might have been a convoy leaving. We watched without speaking, because there was nothing to say that would make that line of lights mean anything to us where we were. When we lowered the hatch and locked it and reset the hinge pins, I felt the cold metal against my palm and thought of every door handle and every latch and every piece of hardware that sits for years doing the same job, and then in 1 week becomes the key to whether a person is inside or outside. We returned to the apartment and stepped inside. We set the locks the same way we had each time. We moved the bookshelf into place. We set the headlamp on the table. I reached to turn off the recorder and then left it on. If anyone finds this, I said, we were here. We did not run at first. We did not break every door. We did not try to be out in the open. We stayed hidden because the streets emptied and the sound of the city turned into a kind of silence that tells you to be careful and to be patient. We watched the last helicopters fly away from the roof, and we did not wave, because what would be the point besides telling ourselves that we tried? We're going to keep doing this, in shifts, with lists, with our small rules written on a piece of paper next to the door. This is not bravery. This is a way to stay calm and alive for as long as the building will let us. I pressed stop. I set the recorder face down so the light would not flash in the dark. I lay on the floor with my shoes near my feet and closed my eyes and did not sleep, but rested. And outside the window, there were scattered fires in trash cans and in a single car that glowed without flame. And the city did not make that big noise that we always say a city makes in a crisis. It made small noises, and then it made none. We lay there. We listened to the elevator shaft settle, and to the stairwell breathe, and to the distant river. And that was the shape of it. The emptying, the staying, the choice to wait and watch, rather than make noise that might draw a different kind of attention. That was the shape of our plan. In the morning, we would count water. We would make tea with the last of the propane. We would divide the rice into smaller portions. We would test the radio and mark another day on the paper with a blunt pencil. We would add notes to the map. We would not open the door unless we were both standing, and we would be ready to go to the roof again if we heard rotor noise. We would listen for the drones, and for the recorded voice that had said the same words for days and then stopped. We would hold our position one more day. We would keep the record going, and if you are hearing this, then the recorder's batteries lasted longer than we planned, and this is enough to tell you. The city did not fall in an hour. It emptied, one apartment and one block and one street at a time, until silence claimed the space where the normal noises live. We stayed hidden and we are alive, and we will keep doing that until we cannot. And when that happens, the note on the wall will show where we went. If there is no note, we stayed. If there are 3 lines of chalk on the roof door, we left and we tried to follow the river west. If there is only this tape, then the last thing we saw was the helicopters moving south, steady and uninterested in small blinking lights, and the city below them was quiet, and that was the truth of it. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like and subscribe. Your support keeps these creepypastas coming. Until next time, stay alert, stay safe, and never ignore the feeling that something is watching.